tightening the grip on Hong Kong. The territory's leader, Carrie Lam, says that the new laws proposed by Beijing will not impact the freedoms of her people. Lam added that other countries have no place interfering in Hong Kong's internal affairs. The measures are set to be approved by China later this week and could be enforced by the end of the month, next month. Joining me right now in a Fox Business exclusive is Next Digital founder and founder of Apple Daily, Jimmy Lai. Jimmy, it is great to have you this morning. Thank you so much for being here. Can you first tell us, how are you doing? There are reports that they want to arrest you. Tell us about your own safety and what's happening on the ground in Hong Kong this morning, or this evening for you, obviously.
Well, people are very desperate because the new national security law, which definitely will take away our rule of law and freedom. So people have two choices: either to emigrate or to stay and fight. And I'm going to stay and fight. So those who want to leave should leave, because it's becoming very dangerous. This place is becoming very dangerous. So
Tell me
people
what
on Sunday,
the implications are. Tell me what the implications are of these new laws that China wants to put in place.
Well, the implication is the media will be dead. Whatever you say, they can say that is subversion, sedition, or, whatever they want to say, they can charge you. So the media is dead. So people like us who are dissidents, who fight for freedom, will never be, will be arrested and maybe sent to China for trial. So, the whole place will be, Hong Kong will not be the same as it was before. So we will lose our freedom and rule of law. And that's the end of Hong Kong and Hong Kong's international financial center.
Well, I mean, that's the whole thing. You would think that the world would be unnerved by all of this. Hong Kong is a financial hub, and people equate it to London and New York, but it's anything like that over the last couple of years. Jimmy, when did things start to change? You have Xi Jinping in China as dictator for life. Is that when things started to change significantly in Hong Kong? How do you see it?
Yeah, since the ascension of Xi Jinping, things become worse and worse. The erosion of Hong Kong's value and the rule of law is very slow. It's getting better. It's going to be worse and worse. So Xi Jinping as a strong man, trying to throttle Hong Kong to become subservient to his rules, or to his dictator rules.
So Jimmy, I mean, there is an article in the Wall Street Journal, The People's Republic versus Jimmy Lai. You've been arrested a couple of times already. You are on the front lines of these protests. Tell me about your own safety. Do you fear for your own life? They do want to arrest you again, right? How are you continuing to stay free when you're right behind you, you've got people looking to lock you up?
Well, I'm not thinking about my safety at this moment. I'm thinking of how should we keep on fighting. There's no way I can think about safety. If I think about my safety, I will always have to worry the consequences of what I do and what I say. So I would never be able to do anything. So the only thing for me is to do the right thing and fight on. I'm 72. I don't care what happened to me. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I can still fight on.
Jimmy, what do you think the goal is here for China with all of this overreach? The handoff, there was an agreed upon partnership that it would be two different systems. Now you've got troops of India and China engaged. You've got troops right there face to face with India. You've got China trying to overextend into Hong Kong. What's going on?
Well, I think that Xi Jinping is just taking the advantage of the virus pandemic to deal aggressively with the world, especially to deal with Hong Kong's rebellions. He thinks that this time the whole world is in crisis, that he can have the space and room to take care of Hong Kong without other country react to it. But this is a dream. President Trump already said that will have serious consequences if they impose the national security law. I hope President Trump will do what he says, and President Trump has always been doing what he says. So I'm very confident that the U.S. administration would do something to save us from this crisis.
Yeah, because I think the rest of the world would get impacted at some point as well, not just Hong Kong. I mean, you recently joined Twitter,
Exactly.
Jimmy, and in just 4 days, you've gathered almost 50,000 followers. You're putting information out there, and the world is listening. This weekend, you tweeted this: "I'm proud of being a Chinese, and I love my country. Unfortunately, my country is run by the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, an evil regime which may make suppression a way of life. I also love Taiwan, where I can both be free and proudly a Chinese." Jimmy, let's talk about this, because the rest of the world should also be concerned with the CCP, the Communist Party's goal of dominating the world. What can the rest of the world do? What do you want to see from the U.S. and its allies?
I think it's a good time now. The world, especially America, confront the CCP when the Chinese economy is at its worst in the last 30 years. And economically and politically, I think Xi Jinping is at a very risk position. This is the time to confront China. This is the time to change China in order to change the world. Without changing China, which holds a very opposing value to the world, we will not have peace unless China is changed to accept the values of the free world.
But Jimmy, how are you going to get the Chinese Communist Party to change? Even in the middle of this pandemic, they've cornered the market for productive equipment. They're continuing to steal intellectual property. We've heard that from a number of senators. They want to beat us to a COVID-19 pandemic, and they've got 1 million Uyghurs locked up in camps right now.
Sanction them. Freeze the account of the officials corrupt the money in U.S., in the world. Sanction their technology products or stop sending technology products to China. There's so many ways the U.S. can do to give pressure to China to change. They can do whatever they like within their own country, but they have to follow the rule when they deal with the world outside.
Jimmy, give us a sense of what it's like on the ground in Hong Kong. Many of us know Hong Kong as an international hub. How have things changed from your vantage point on the ground?
Well, people are very nervous. The stock market dropped like crazy, and also the stock of the property, the stock of the property company also dropped like crazy. That tells us that the property market is going to drop very much because people are leaving with their money. The people from China bought real estate in Hong Kong, not just for the real estate, but for the safety and the rule of law, and which they pay a high price for. Now they don't feel safe anymore. They don't feel Hong Kong have the rule of law to protect them anymore. So they are leaving with their money.
And we should point out there were many young people on those protest lines along with you, right, Jimmy? Because they're afraid that their future is not what they accepted. A lot of young people who thought Hong Kong would be a different place for them as they get older and start businesses or go into business.
Yeah, that's why the young people especially are not giving up. On Sunday, there may be 10,000 young people came out and protest, which is very important because the new national security law was announced to be imposed just 1 or 2 days before, and people just brave it out on the street. That gives us confidence to go on our resistance movement. people
Do you
on
see
the ground.
people leaving Hong Kong and moving elsewhere? Are they going to Australia? Are they going elsewhere to spend their money and buy homes there?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, what we can know is that the Google search and the social media's talk, the most heated topic is immigration. People are looking to leave now. A lot of people are exploring the possibility of going to Taiwan. So I hope the Taiwan president, Tsai Ing-wen, will give Hong Kong people the more liberal permit to emigrate to Taiwan.
Right.
Not just talk,
Jimmy,
to stand with us.
You have shown incredible courage and leadership throughout this, Jimmy. I know that you're going to be there on the front lines continuing. We want to hear from you regularly, Jimmy. Our audience wants to know how things are going. Please come back soon. Are you expecting to get arrested?
Yes.
When?
It doesn't matter. I don't know. I'm going to be in court on June 15th with the other 14 prominent dissidents. They arrest us for the purpose of intimidating those moderate Hong Kong people who tend to go on the street to demonstrate, to isolate those radical young people, which is only a small part, which they can easily handle. So, we, as the moderate Hong Kong people, cannot be frightened. We have to go on to demonstrate and protest. That's one thing that we have to continue to do.
Jimmy, we will be following your fight. Thank you for your fight of freedom, and we certainly are supporting you here.